David becomes the king first in Hebron, which is in the south, and he unites the tribes there in the southern part of the country. But then the northern tribes, after a long struggle, come to him. And they say, well, you're bone of our bone and flesh of our flesh. And David effects in his person the unity of Israel. And then he conquers that Jebusite city, which he renames Jerusalem, the city of David. And that becomes the capital of this united country. Well, see, this is much more than a political thing. It's a deeply spiritual thing. Israel is meant by the unity of its praise, by the power of its witness, to gather the whole world. If Israel's together, then the world can come together around it. That was the biblical idea. If Israel's divided, scattered, then it can't fulfill its mission. See, so David is a kind of messianic figure there. He's a forerunner of Christ, because he gathers the tribes. And more to it, he establishes the Ark of the Covenant in Jerusalem. Now that's the prototype of the temple that will eventually come up under his son, Solomon. But the Ark of the Covenant now is the focus of Israel's worship. David dances before the Ark in that beautiful scene, one of the most lyrical in the whole Bible. With reckless abandon, David dances before the Ark of the Covenant as he brings it into Jerusalem. The idea there, see, as a priest, as leader of liturgy, that's a liturgical procession, isn't it, as David leads the people in. And in their ecstatic praise of God, they find their unity, and then they will become a magnet to the world with them. I told the students, every time you say Mass, that's what you're doing. All the gestures at the Mass are descendants from the gestures of the priests in the Jerusalem temple. And they say, I think very beautifully, those gestures were in turn in imitation of David, dancing before the Ark of the Covenant. So the priest with his arms out and together and then bowing and moving, it's an imitation of David dancing. But what we're doing there is leading people in prayer, in the praise of the true God, which brings us together. The liturgy is the source and summit of the Christian life. The priest in the parish is the sign and symbol and effector of unity. That's a Davidic role. It's a messianic, it's a Christ role that the priest plays in the parish. And the liturgy is so key. Just one more thing I share with them about David's failures. You won't find it in 1 Chronicles, which also tells much of the same story of David, but it leaves out much of the darkness, the negativity. 2 Samuel doesn't. It shows David in all of his humanity, all of his limitation, blindness, weakness. The most startling example, of course, is the episode with Bathsheba and Uriah. So you know the story, it commences this way. That time of year when kings are out on campaign, David was home in Jerusalem in his palace. See, in some ways that line gives away the whole story. When kings are out campaigning, that time of year when David's been campaigning his whole life, why wasn't he? Why wasn't he out fighting? See? The church is ecclesia militans, we say, right? The fighting church. We're always in the fight against sin and evil and death and all of its attendant consequences. Priests go bad, I told these students. Priests go bad when they stop fighting, when they stop engaging the struggle. And what happens is they get fat and sassy. You know what I mean? They stay home. The next line of the story is that David, late in the afternoon, rising from his siesta, spots Bathsheba. See? Well, not too subtly, it's saying after an hours-long nap, David, who should be out fighting, he's home, but after an hours-long afternoon nap, that's when he gets into trouble, see? Don't fall back from the fight. Stay in the fight. Stay engaged. Because when you stop, that's when the temptations come. Now, I don't want to let Bathsheba off the hook. I've been blaming David, but here's someone, who just happens to be bathing on the roof, knowing that the king can see her. I don't want to, throw her under the bus either, but I think there's plenty of blame to go around. I told the students that, believe me, there'll be people in all kinds of ways, not just sexual seduction, but all kinds of seductions waiting for you. People will seduce you in all sorts of ways, and you got to be steeled against that. David here, it's a moment of great weakness. It's a great, it's a subtle detail, but he's on the roof, surveying, say, the city. He's in a godlike perspective. That's never good. Only God has that proper surveillance of the whole world. When you aspire to that, something's gone wrong. See, the fat and sassy, lazy David, now acting like God, overseeing his whole city, that's when trouble comes, you know. So we know the story. He impregnates Bathsheba, and then he decides, I've got to cover up this crime. So he gets Uriah, Bathsheba's husband, to come home, and then he refuses to cooperate with David's plan. I mean, he's such an upright soldier, he won't cooperate. So then David decides, I have to have him killed. And so there's something so brutal about that story. And this is David. This is the man after God's own heart, the sweet singer of Israel. This is David, not some beginner in the spiritual life. This is, King David, the anointed of the Lord, does this terrible thing, So it goes in the arena of sin. So it goes. But the lesson from 2 Samuel is the Lord forgives David when he confronts him, but the sword will never leave your house, he says, and it doesn't. Relentlessly to the end of David's life. He's bedeviled by this. John Lennon had that song, Instant Karma's Gonna Get You. It might not be instant, but it will get you. I mean, that's a basic biblical idea, is that the wicked things we do don't just go away. They don't just disappear. They are visited upon us, and not in a spirit of meanness on God's part. It's just the structure of reality, It's built into the moral fabric of the world, that you do something wicked, that it tends to have deleterious consequences. So David is punished for the rest of his life for it. Something else which is really intriguing to me in that story is the theme of David, the bad father. Go back to the very beginning of 1 Samuel. So again, we say 1 and 2 Samuel. It was all one book. It was written by one figure, edited by one figure. So it's got a great literary cohesiveness. But go back to the very beginning, you hear about Eli. Eli is a priest of Israel. He has two sons, also priests, Hophni and Phinehas, who are wicked. And they're doing terrible things and taking advantage of people and using their office in an abusive way. People tell Eli, Eli doesn't do anything. Now that should sound a little bit familiar, doesn't it? Bad priests taking advantage of the people, their superiors being told about it and not doing anything. Hello, this is today. It's an ancient story and it's today, right? Well, what happens is instant karma is going to get you, Is Hophni and Phinehas are killed in battle. The Ark of the Covenant is taken away. And then the Bible is, as the news is brought to Eli, the old man, he hears the news. And then it says, because he was so fat, he fell over backward and his neck broke and he died. Now, the Bible is full of humor, and that's one of them there. Is he got fat and sassy too. Eli, fat, self-indulgent. That's the problem. And it's the wickedness of a bad father that allowed his sons to do bad things, which led to terrible problems. Okay. David echoes Eli now at the end of the story, because David has got all these children, and he's a bad father. He doesn't discipline them. Amnon rapes his half-sister Tamar. Terrible scene, brutal scene in 2 Samuel. David finds out about it. What does he do? Nothing. That makes Absalom, Tamar's brother, so angry that he slays Amnon, his half-brother. David finds out about it. What does he do? Nothing. Which leads Absalom now to feel, that he can rebel against his father, and he leads this terrible civil war, which then leads to Absalom's death. And David, weeps, Absalom, my son, Absalom. It's a beautiful scene, poignant scene. What's the idea, though? Is David, you were a bad father. See, you should have intervened. You should have acted. And the fact that you didn't led to a calamity for you and for the country. It reminds me there of Shakespeare. There are figures like Macbeth and Richard III who are lusting for power. We know about them. But look at a figure like King Lear or a figure like Titus Andronicus. These are people who weren't lusting for power. They gave power away, and that led to trouble. Titus Andronicus should have taken the crown, but he refused it, and calamity came. See, sometimes not seizing power in the right way, not doing what you're supposed to do, leads to trouble. So I told the students, I'll tell any priests listening, anyone in authority in the church, being a bad father has bad consequences. Don't think, oh, look, I'm a nice guy. Oh, no, who am I to tell them what to do? Then you're Eli, and then you're David as a bad father. And that leads to calamity for Israel, in the new Israel, the church. Okay, There's much more to be said, and I love those David stories, and they're some of the most powerful from all of ancient literature. Nothing quite rivals those stories in terms of their psychological perceptiveness and theological depth. So I might urge people to revisit 1 and 2 Samuel, read the stories of David, and I think anyone interested in the spiritual life can draw a lot of benefit from them.